both are called Joan of Arc. There are many such movies based on this event in history, but most of them were made by French people because Joan of Arc is their martyr, their patron saint of their country, and they loved her so much, and she died tragically well, it depends on how you look at this thing, but most French people would say the British, or I'm sorry, it's not the British. At that time, there was no British Empire, no country called the British. It's called England. So it was during the war between the two countries. We say two big countries, but at that time they were both quite small compared to the empire they eventually become. These are tiny countries, that is England and France. And they had a war for 100 years. That is quite a long war, more than 100 years, 116 years. And there were numerous movies based on this event, and we just chose two of them because you can view them on YouTube for free. If you want to see other versions, you can also see it on either YouTube or many other streaming companies, but then you have to pay for it. And these are in pretty good resolution. I like them, but except that the English translation, they were provided by machines. We call it AI, artificial intelligence. So they're not reliable. In fact, its translations are pretty bad. The first one is called Joan of Arc, and the second one is also called Joan of Arc. This one is made in 1948 with a big star, Ingrid Bergman. At that time, she is already a very, very big star. And she wanted to make this movie. She wanted to play this role for a long time, and she finally made it. So she was very happy. On the other hand, we have a much more recent one in 1999. It was also called the Joan of Arc, and I think it was a 2-episode TV movie in the beginning. Then they made it into one movie and put it on YouTube, so you can watch it as if it's an entire full movie in the movie theater, but it was originally a mini series on TV. And this has a very distinct difference. That is, the actress who played Joan of Arc was only half the age of Ingrid Bergman. So age-wise, it is much more appropriate. However, it is very common I may say, in the whole world, that people like to make movies with an older person playing a young role because they think that an older person is has more experience in life, so they could express different emotion better than a very young person. And it's really, really common. For example, you have John Travolta or what's the name of the young man who played Back to the Future? Well, he was Alex in the movie. Do you remember his name?
Fox? Yeah.
Oh, Fox. Yeah, that's right. Fox is his name. What's the first name then?
Trying to think.
Yeah. Okay. But it's great you remember Fox. Yeah. He was a a pretty big star, but he became even bigger. But when I mentioned Fox and John Travolta, they both played high school students when they were in their 30s or very late 20s. And there are numerous examples. And in this case, we have Ingrid Bergman, who was 33 years old, and she was playing this girl in the beginning of the movie, only about 17 years old. So she was about twice as old. And not only that, she also played the same role in another version of a movie, Joan of Arc, and when she was 39 years old. So people did not think twice when they learned that she was playing a young girl, because it's really common. But for the second one on this slide, 1999 version, it was Lily Sobieski, and she was really, really young. So it's very unusual for a very young girl to be playing a role that is age appropriate for her. Okay, so you can find either of this one movie. Actually, there were more than one versions, and sometimes one of them disappeared because of copyright infringement. We say copyright infringement. So without the ment, it's a verb. Infringe is to violate. If you put a movie which you don't have the copyright of, and you put it on YouTube for everyone to watch, that's against the law. And the YouTube and many other high-tech company who show videos always is diligently trying to find people who are violating copyright law and take them down. So it has happened several times in our very short history of watching free YouTube movies to talk about in the class. And we already had quite a few movies disappeared on YouTube. That's how it happened, because of copyright infringement. And before we talk about the movie, I have two more slides that are unrelated to the movie. The first one is a picture I recently took. I went to Seattle Center and I saw the thing, and I had to take a picture to show you, because Seattle has a newer ice hockey team. It's called the Kraken. And I've been talking about their training facility in Northgate Mall, which is very close to my home. And I pass by nearly every day. And I took a picture of that training facility, even though I did not step into that place because there's hardly any free parking around there. There's lots of construction. So I've seen that training facility. I heard that has 3 ice rinks. And I've never seen this one, that is where the team itself play, do their competition here. They play ice hockey games in Seattle Center in this stadium called the Climate Pledge. That is a very funny name for a sport team, because it's so bleeding heartly progressive. That shows how progressive Seattle is. We are a very blue state. Even our ice hockey team has a brand new competition stadium called the Climate Pledge, which is just weird. Okay, now we know where they play. This is the same place which used to house the stadium for Supersonics, which is a Seattle National League. We don't call it National League. And NBA team, Supersonic. They used to be here. However, business was not good enough, so it was sold to Alabama. I think it's Oklahoma City. So the team now is no longer here, and they changed this to an ice hockey team stadium. Okay, the second slide I want to show you is maybe many of you have seen it. If you get into chat rooms and people are slamming you with news, funny jokes and things like that. And this is a thing I got. I saw it online, the chat room, LINE, and it is supposed to be from People magazine. I don't know if it is true or not, because most things when your old classmates sent to you, most of them are not true, but this one seems to be okay. And it is a quote from Queen Elizabeth II, who recently passed away. And it was a comment she made on Donald Trump when Donald Trump was the president and was going to visit her, and right after he visited her, and the Queen made some derogatory comments about Donald Trump. And I love to see that because we can learn a lot of words that we haven't even heard of that we can use very handily on people we don't like. This is the Queen saying that Donald Trump is an uncouth ignoramus, which means he is 没有教养的傻瓜。This uncouth ignoramus is 一个没有教养的傻瓜. And then she went on to say a lot of bad words to describe Donald Trump. He's a buffoon of the highest order, a cretin, a rube, an uncouth, stupid plunker. So if you want to say somebody is really stupid, here are a lot of words for you to put in your vocabulary to use every day. Maybe not every day, okay? So they essentially means the same thing. It just means an idiot, stupid person, and ill-educated, unsophisticated, and country bum. So it's a buffoon or a cretin or a rube or an uncouth, stupid plunker. All these words mean the same thing. Okay, enough of those bad words. Let's start with Joan of Arc. And when we talk about Joan of Arc, I want to remind you something that we talked recently. It is The Burghers of Calais by Auguste Rodin. And here is a map of Calais. And across the English Channel, there's a city called Dover. There's an English Channel, which is part of the Atlantic City. It's like Taiwan Strait is a part of Pacific Ocean, but it's way in the corner and blocked by small landmass. So it's sort of a different place, but it's part of the ocean. And this English Channel has a narrowest part, which every year there are people trying to swim through the channel by taking this route, which is between Dover and Calais. 加来跟多佛, I guess. Dover is very famous for its chalk cliffs. So if you go from the sea or from the air approaching Dover, you will see the coast, which is not a sandy beach. It's not a beach with lots of rocks, but it's a cliff. 就是一个 cliff 是什么？峭壁, huh? Okay. 峭壁, but it's white because it's a chalk cliff. Chalk 就是粉笔那个字就是 chalk, huh? I think it's maybe some kind of sandstone or something. Geologically speaking, it is very different from most of the seashores because it's a high cliff, which is entirely white. And it's got to be so famous because during the Second World War, every time soldiers or pilots or whatever from England went to fight over France or later in Germany and so on, they would go home and they would see that white cliff, and it becomes related to in many of the famous poems and written whatever novels or songs.
Music.
Yeah, music song. Yeah, there are songs called the White Cliffs of Dover. It's all to express their love for their country after they safely returned from the battlefield. So that's how Dover became so famous for its white cliffs. And across that strait, 海峡, is Calais. And the two countries, when they fight, when they fought during the 100-Year War, there was a lot of traffic on this English Channel, shipping all these armies across to mostly it's the English side invading the French side. French hardly had any battles in England because they were being attacked and they lost a lot of ground. However, after 116 years, they finally won this war, and as a result, they totally chased the English people out of the main continent. So that was a decisive victory for the French people. And, English people originally came from France. The people in Normandy who originally came from Scandinavia, they settled in France, in Normandy. And later, William the Conqueror, who was a Viking from the Viking descent from maybe, I don't know, Norway or Sweden, probably Sweden. Anyway, he was a Viking. I mean, his ancestors were Viking and settled in France. But then he launched this big battle and conquered England. That's how England, they simply lost their king. Okay, their king died. And you can say that the entire English society is under French colonization, but it's not really colonization because the person who got there, they all stayed there forever. They did not have a base elsewhere. So England is, you can say England is a country that originally, it was totally under control by the French people. So their language is similar, everything is similar, but these people came and stayed and never left. So for quite a few hundred years, lots of English kings had territory in France. So here and then, if you go to, I forgot the name of the city when I was on this trip, and there was a castle that was built by Lion King. I'm sorry, not Lion King. Lionheart, King Richard, Richard the Lionheart of England. He built that castle in France because that was part of England at that time. And for a while they had complicated arrangements so that they jointly own different parts of this land, which is part of France. But after the 100-Year War, France successfully chased the English people out of their land forever. And the story we talked about several months ago was a statue made by Auguste Rodin, who is a French sculptor. And it's about 6 citizens, honorable citizens of Calais, who volunteered to surrender themselves to the King of England in order to break the siege, because England was having a siege of their entire city in 1346. After an 11-month siege, they surrendered, and the 6 of them voluntarily agreed to become English king's prisoner. And the king, or the queen actually, the queen said, oh, we should not kill them because I am pregnant and it's not good for me to see 6 honorable people being killed. So they survived, and a couple, maybe 500-600 years later, Rodin decided to honor them, to celebrate this wonderful deed by making that sculpture. But this happened in 1346, which is in the very early part of the 100-year war, while Joan of Arc, whose story also happened around in this area, her story occurred almost 100 years later, because she went to see the king when she was 17 years old in 1428, and she died in 1431. So these things are almost 100 years apart. It's like a bookcase. The beginning was the burgher of Calais, and at the end it was Joan of Arc, but not the very beginning. A little bit, very much at the beginning and very much at the end, but not the real end. Okay. And this one is about the 100 Years' War, and the date exactly is in 1337, which is a couple of years, less than 10 years before the burghers of Calais, and the end was in 1453, which is like 20 years before Joan of Arc was killed. So this is more than 100 years. Both events happened during this war. And the location is France, the Low Countries, Great Britain, and Iberian Peninsula, which means France, the Netherlands, Belgium. I think whoever wrote this for Wikipedia was wrong in that it was not between Great Britain, because it was way before Great Britain came into existence. Once we talked about Great Britain, and this is we have this next slide, which shows that on the English side, you have 5 kings waging the war against the French side, which happens to be exactly 5 kings in France as well. So if you look at the English side, you have Edward III, Richard II, Henry IV, V, and VI. All these happened before Henry VIII, obviously. And then after Henry VIII, you had his young son, who was on the throne for a very short time. I think it's an Edward. But then you have Queen Elizabeth. Queen Elizabeth was after all these kings, and she reigned for a very long time. And at the end, she is still ahead of a country which is on the verge of becoming a huge, great empire that will be called the British Empire, but not in her lifetime. That's why when you talk about this 100-year war, you cannot say this side is Great Britain. That was wrong. Okay, I copied it from somewhere else, but it was wrong. Here, I'm going to mark it. What can I do? Maybe I can cross it out. I could do this. Okay, that will remind me to change that into England. Okay. And after England, there are countries on the Iberian Peninsula, which means Spain and Portugal. So there are 6 countries fighting this war, but mainly it's France and England. And you cannot say anything about the empire, because at that time there was no empire. It was way before that. And you cannot say it's a war between the Catholic Church countries and the Protestant, because Martin Luther of Germany. Well, there was no Germany at that time. Okay, Martin Luther was not even born at that time. So you cannot even say this is a religious war, because they are all Catholic countries. Okay. But mainly it's just England and France fighting to resolve England wants France to have a certain person to be king, while France, there are many people who wanted to be king or had the help of other countries to be king. So this is I was going to say inheritance, but it's not. It is trying to put somebody on the throne. Originally it's that, but later on, because there are more countries involved, the issues became bigger and bigger. And the end result is that France won the war. So France and their allies, which could be the Belgium and the Netherlands and Belgium, 就是荷兰、比利时跟法国。At that time, I don't even know if Luxembourg exists. Anyway, so when we talk about history, we have to remember the timeline, the context. For example, people nowadays still say Sulian. That is totally wrong. There is no Sulian in this world right now. Ever since, I don't know, I think before Putin, maybe Yeltsin. Yeah, Yeltsin changed the country into a different country. They tossed away communism, so they are no longer the Soviet Union. Remember that. Don't say Soviet Union about the country that is there now. Okay, and for Great Britain, we know that after Queen Elizabeth, there was this. Because she was not married and having no heir, they had to go to Scotland to get a young boy to become a king for both countries. And because of that, they started to have a country with two countries become one, and they want to call it differently. So during the reign of Queen Anne, they decided to call this British. They start to use the word British, and then later they have more land and so on. They become the United Kingdom, with Ireland involved in this thing, even though Ireland was just a colony, not a part of the country. Anyway, so you cannot call this country Great Britain at this moment. And as a result of the victory for France, England loses all the continental territories. That is a big change. And I have this interesting slide here to show you that at different times, there are 4 maps of France. You can see that during this 116 years of war, the territory of France changed a lot. In the beginning, it was big and then became smaller and smaller. They lost the part in the southwest, which is Burgundy, because England became the ally of Burgundy. So they became one side, while France became much smaller. And then in 1429, when Joan of Arc came around, she was here during the siege of, what's that called? Orleans. Okay, Orleans. You know, that big city is called Orleans, and when people came to United States and founded a city, they called it New Orleans because it was a new city modeled after Orleans. So it's New Orleans. Well, you pronounce it in English, it becomes New Orleans, but it was a word after this original city, which is Orleans. When Joan of Arc came on the scene, English people were surrounding the city of Orleans, which is right on the border between the two territories. And Joan of Arc was able to rally the people and the army and chase the English people out of this area. And eventually, after she died and after 20 more years, then France was able to reclaim all the lost territories and became one, a whole country. That was in 1453. That's the end of the 100-year-old. If you know your history, you know that 1453 was the year that Constantinople fell under the siege of the Sultan of Turkish Empire. Okay, so that was a big year. These people were fighting in Western Europe, but in the East, the entire Eastern Roman Empire fell on during that year. Okay, so if you have these four maps, it really helps you to understand. In the beginning, France is so big, and then Burgundy voted from their country and allied with England. And then in 1429, that's the year of Joan of Arc, in that year, she went to see the Dauphin of France and insisted that he be crowned as King Charles II. So that's how it happened. I'm sorry, it's King Charles the seventh, not the second. Okay, we had this chart. So Charles the seventh was the last king during this war, and he was on the throne. I mean, during the years that he was on the throne, he eventually won the war for France. So if you look at the map, you can see at the time that Joan of Arc came around, France was losing terribly and the morale was terrible. Without her, the country would be totally run over by the English people. But she was able to rally the people and started to recover some of the land until 20 years later, they entirely beat the English army. So that's quite an achievement. So that's the period of this war. And originally it was a conflict between England and France. And this you can consider it's in late Middle Ages. At that time, in Italy, the Renaissance has started already, but not in England or in France or in Germany. A big change is coming, but they're still fighting their old war. It originated, that's how they started the war, is because the disputed claims to the French throne. Different people had ambitions to be the king of France. So there's a huge dispute that caused the two countries to be engaged in war. On the English side, it's a house of Plantagenet. On the French side, it's a house of Valois. They call their dynasties the house of something. It's similar to our dynasties, but it's a little different. Whenever we have a revolution or something, someone usually leading an army would beat the army of the previous dynasty and establish a new dynasty. In our history, there would be Han, actually all of them, Han, Jin, Sui, Tang, Song, Yuan, Ming, Qing, all these dynasties happened because there was a military person who arose to beat the old dynasty and became the new emperor. But in the West, it's a little different. They have house of something. For example, from Queen Victoria, she came from Germany. She was a German girl. So when the English throne, the king of England or a British emperor or whatever, I guess it was a king at the time. When English king died and there was no heir immediately found, so they went to Germany and got Queen Victoria here. And because she is a woman and she married her husband, who was also German, the dynasty changed because the house, the name of the house changed because her last name is a different name, even though there was no revolution, there was no change or whatever. It was a smooth transition, but the name of the house changed. So in the Western history, when you say a certain country was ruled by a house of something, it's not necessarily a different name of the house means a violent revolution. Usually there was no revolution. For example, Queen Elizabeth, she got married and her husband has a different last name. So they wanted to change it to her husband's last name so that their house can be called House of something. I don't know. Mountbatten. Well, it's a very German name, and during the war, it's very bad because they're fighting the Germany. Well, she got married after the war, but during the war, her father was having a house of something, but it's a very long German name because of Queen Victoria's husband's name. And the Queen, when Queen Victoria's son ascended the throne. At that time, they were fighting Germans, so they decided to pick a pretty English name as their house, and it's called the House of Windsor. And there was no fighting of any kind to make the change, but they just picked a nicer name. So the house becomes House of Windsor right now, until now. I don't know why Queen Elizabeth did not change. So it's all very political. You can change names whatever you want, and there's no bloodshed at all. So you look at this, for example, you have Plantagenet as Henry's side, English side. You have Henry the IV and Fifth and Sixth. And after the Seventh, it was passed to the brother of Henry VII, which is who is Henry VIII, and it became the House of Tudor, not because there was a war, not because there was a marriage. I don't know exactly why, but the name House of Plantagenet became a House of Tudor when Henry VIII became the king. You beat me. I don't know why. So there are very strange circumstances in the West, very different from the Chinese transition of dynasties. And as they were fighting, during this 100-year war, there were 5 different kings on each side, and the reason for the war became much more complicated. At the beginning, they just want to put a different person on the throne of France, but later there were other countries involved, and the reasons became complicated, and each country became more nationalized, which is, it's like during our 民国时期, we have lots of warlords occupying different corners of this country. So China from 1912 was not really unified until Chiang Kai-shek started to 北伐, and he took the army all the way north and consolidated his power and beat all the warlords and became one country. But in the West, it's like this situation most of the time. So when you talk about a Western country, whether it's England or France or Italy or Germany, during the old times, it was not one big country with one single head of state administering everything in this country. But during this war, people started to align their ideas for their country. So it's an emerging nationalism. And this thing became more and more so, and people have more identity of nationalism. And at the end of 19th century, Italy and Germany, among many other countries, they became a huge, big country by combining dozens and dozens of little, small states into a big country. So in the old days, the nationalism was never heard of. People don't have this idea of, oh, I love my country, I want to die for my country. No, you only have your local cities or province or something. There was not a big, huge country there for you to be loyal to. But this concept became more and more, and that's why this war was fought for so long. And the society was totally changed after the war. Okay. So you say that there's a war that lasted 116 years, but it was interrupted by several truces. TRUCE is a 停战. So sometimes they would negotiate and stop to fight for a while, and then they would do 一言不合, they started to fight again. So it was going on and off and on and off and on and off. And the result, the influence it had on the entire Europe continent was very, very strong. And for example, during any large-scale wars, there was new weapons being invented, and the new tactics of fighting the war developed. After each world war, it's tremendous change in the technology of battling each other. And this was one of the very early big wars that happened that changed the landscape and the way people fight and how they fight. And another thing it mentioned is chivalry. Chivalry is something of the medieval times. 中古时代的时候有一种骑士精神这种做法. But since the end of the war, chivalry became no longer so. People don't engage in that kind of idea very much anymore. So when you read about novels about chivalry, for example, like Robin Hood, 罗宾汉, or what's that? King Arthur, okay, King Arthur and the Round Table, all those people riding on the horses and fighting. There were tons of such romantic stories about chivalry, about strong and heroic fighters or warriors who engaged in the war, but they treat ladies so politely, and they're always trying to rescue ladies in danger. That kind of spirit sort of went away at the end of this war. I already talked about this national identity. And I already mentioned about the second thing as well, which is that French and the English monarchy, they were doing a lot of things either together or coordinated actions or occupying different areas in France. Part of it was belonging to England, but after this war, England got out of the continent entirely, and France was able to keep their territory intact from England. All the invasions afterwards were from Germany and on this side, or from other sides. Okay, but it's nothing to do with the English side. So let's talk about this. And anybody has anything to say? I mean, have you watched the movie and you want to say which movie you like, or whether the actress was too old? So, yes?
I was going to say I watched those movies, and yeah, I agree that the 1999 the Canadian miniseries that made into one movie, the actress, I mean, she looks age-wise,
yes,
and that's more aligned with genre art in real life. And also her acting is quite good, actually.
Yes, for a very young girl, yes.
Yeah, very impressed by her performance.
Her presence is so good, yeah.
Right. And yeah, the story was close to 3 hours, but it flowed, so no problem.
Yes, I think so too, yeah.
Yeah.
The first one I thought was a little boring because nothing happened.
Yeah. And her, Ingrid Bergman, is a giant, and the actress she is, little too, not regimental, I don't know the word for it, but it just maybe because she was in her 30s, so it just didn't.
I think she's very reserved and dignified, but
perhaps
not with this young passion or
right innocent country girl village. I think she was actually probably illiterate. I don't think she could read or write.
Probably not.
Probably not.
Yeah.
Right. And Ingrid Bergman looked a little bit too sophisticated for that.
Yes. You go to big cities in Europe, like Germany or France, you would see huge Catholic churches, and they would put Bible stories carved in, and on the glasses, you can see Bible stories on the window or in the front of the building with lots of different stories. That's because people who go to the church at that time, they don't read at all, nothing at all. Yeah, very, very few people read. They are only the clergies. Of course, China also has a lot of people who don't read, but we don't have the clergies. Yeah, we are a godless country. So we have a lot of people on top, the scholars and the officials, they read, and if you read well and pass the test, you can become rich and famous. That's why lots of people at the bottom try to read, even though the literacy rate was not very high. There are more people who came to China than they were in Europe, I would say that.
Yeah. In Europe, the Western world at that time, I think the church is the one that, as far as literacy, the clergymen and the higher ups, they read, but the majority of people,
Yeah,
not
even the
only
king, Charlemagne the Great,
he
Charlie
does not
he could not read.
really. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. And the other thing that struck me as funny, I'm sorry, I'm talking so much about,
It's okay.
she seems, especially from the second movie, the 1999 version, because the first one, because of language, I had a little bit difficulty following some of the dialogues in the translation, but the second one, the 1999 version, I could follow without too much difficulty.
Yeah.
But seems that she willingly, but sacrificed herself, so that she made the king a great king and united the country and chased the English out. But that's truly a believer devotion. And the king used her actually. Maybe it can be justified, but it seems very cruel.
Yeah, there's a lot of politics in there. Yeah. She's the innocent girl.
Right.
She's actually very courageous, knowing that she will die in the end.
Yeah. Just it's amazing. Yeah. Anyway.
So this is a slide about her life. So she, at a young age, she started to hear voices. A lot of the religious people heard voices, and nowadays we say that that's because they have they're bipolar or schizophrenia or whatever. But at that time, almost everyone claimed that they hear God speaking to them, or they hear the angels or saints. So in this case, she heard 3 people, holy people, speaking to her, including an angel, Saint Michael, Saint Michael, and 2 female saints, Saint Margaret and Saint Catherine. So she constantly hears such voices for quite a few years, but she did not take any action until she was 17 or so. Actually, we don't really know her birthday. We don't know when she was born or what year she was born, but she was about at that age. She was born to a property, the peasant family. So the family was not poor. They owned land, but they were farmers. So in 1428, in both movies, you saw that she asked a relative or a neighbor or whoever who was going to the city where Charles was, and she wants to be taken there so that she could try to convince the Dauphin to be crowned the king. And that's the first step that she took to let the king have the honor and the respect by a large amount of people, and then she would lead them to some victories here and there, and totally turn the tide, because the country was without rudder. Rudder 就是舵哈，船的舵。So she put the king there, and she led the army to victories. That totally changed the story of this war. Okay. And she was totally religious, very, very religious girl, goes to the church all the time. And she believed that God wanted her to do this. It's her mission to do it. And at that time, there's the siege of Orleans, and the French people just thought they were going to lose their country and there's no hope at all. And she arrived in that city in 1429. She was probably 17. And then she rallied the army and solved the problem and broke the siege. And the English army abandoned the siege. And then she encouraged the Dauphin to become the king, to be crowned in Reims, I think. He was crowned in Reims. That is also a city with a large Catholic cathedral. And after that, she was not always successful, actually. She lost quite a few battles, and the king wanted to squeeze her out. And in the end, for her, she was captured by the Burgundians, who was aligned with England, and they handed her over to the English side, and they decided to try her in Catholic court. So you have lots of different sides involved in this final trial, and eventually it was the Catholic Bishop Cojon, I guess. He conducted the trial and convicted her of this. In the second bullet, she was convicted because she was accused of heresy, 就是说她不是虔诚的基督教徒，而是个异教徒。可是 of course, she is actually very much a Catholic believer, but the church decided that her thoughts were not purely Catholic. She was having evil thought. Those voices that she heard was not from angels or from anyone else, but from devils or demons. That's really how if you want to say that, I don't know who can prove that it is right or wrong. And one other thing she was accused of is a blasphemy, 就是毒神反这个教的, because she was dressed as a man or as a boy. A girl dressed as a man is against the church. So she was, one of her crime was because she was dressed as a man. And this is very much like the witch hunt in America. Maybe that was a little later, but not too late. It was way before the revolution, American Revolution. The society was unstable and they were surrounded by Indians attacking them. And in their panic or stress or distress or whatever, they decided that some of the women were witches, and they arrested those women and accused them and give them a trial and burn them on the stake. Just like these people, they had a trial for Joan of Arc and burn her at a stake in the name of she's a witch. She's not a true Christian. And so she died on the stake in Rouen, which is a French city a little north of Lyon. Okay. Okay. And 100 years later, there was a court that reinvestigated her case and overturned the verdict and decided that the trial was full of irregularity, full of errors, and there was deceit and so on. So they think their new verdict is that Joan of Arc was innocent. She should not have died. So she is a martyr. Martyr means you died for your religion or for country. At that time, religion is a stronger cause than anything else. So she was a martyr and she became a saint. She was canonized by the Catholic Church in 1920. After the French Revolution, she became a national symbol of France. So you could see her statue usually riding on a horse, carrying a big sword or whatever weapon. And you can see that in Paris, in front of the Sacré-Cœur, the 圣心教堂 on the hill in Montmartre, or behind the Palais, Grand Palais, and so on. And in many cities, yeah, she was just adored as a saint and a hero of this country, a martyr. However, everything has two sides, and the English side, they don't think so at all. Okay, so you have George Bernard Shaw, he wrote a play about Joan of Arc, saying that all these people who tried her, they really thought they were right, and they really thought she was wrong, and so on and so forth. And there was a play that was also made into movies. So in the war, there are always two sides, if not more sides. And in this war that was fought for so long between a significantly big country, there are different sides of the story. Okay, so there's this movie that we saw with Ingrid Bergman. That's the first one we're going to talk about. It's based on a play by the same by a different name, which is called The Joan of Lorraine. Lorraine is we say Alsace and Lorraine are the two principalities or two provinces that were fought, situation between Germany and France. So we used to read the story about 最后一刻. That is when France lost the war against Germany, these two provinces or states would change sides to be 割地赔款, okay? So they became under German control. And after another war, it came out to this side. I bet it was part of Germany. Then it was turned over to France, and many times, okay? Okay. So she died at less than 70 years old of, I think it's breast cancer. This was her dream project because she was Joan of Arc on stage on Broadway, and she wanted to make it into a movie with her playing the same role. And finally, it was okayed. She was very happy. It was her dream project. However, the movie was not very successful. There were lots of stories telling you that it was excuse me for a second. Carrie. Excuse me, because I kept getting phone calls from my granddaughter, but I turned the phone off. So I asked her mother to answer the phone. Okay, mixed reviews. So the critics, some did not like it, some liked it. So we call it mixed review. When we say a movie had mixed review, it is saying that it's probably not very good, because if it's very good, everybody would say it's good. When you get a mixed review, no matter is a movie or not, anything that gets a mixed review means it's not really very good. But there are stories that a huge amount of money was lost, but the movie did not lose so much money, maybe slightly, or maybe even have some profit, but it's not a huge disaster. the movie is very important in the career of Ingrid Bergman because we talked about her extramarital affair with the French Italian director Roberto Rossellini. And that news broke a few months after this movie was made. Before the movie, 5 months after the release of the film. So ever since that time, she was really suffering from huge backlash of that extramarital affair. At that time, at least, American people are very straight-laced. They don't like people to have extramarital affairs. Unlike European people, they are more loose about such ideas, but not the American people at that time. So she lost a lot of goodwill, and she had to move to Europe to make European movies. She was shunned as a pariah. For about 10 years, eventually they got a divorce. So later, when she made Anastasia, it was like a comeback. The Hollywood and the American people started to welcome her back into their world. And so there was a very low time for her, both career-wise and whatever, her mental condition. I wouldn't say condition. She was really shunned by people for quite a while. And with the comeback of Anastasia, which is the story of a princess who, it's called the 真假公主. It's a princess who was the daughter of the Shah of Russia during the Communist Revolution. In 1917, the empire was turned upside down. The royal family entire family was captured by the revolutionary, maybe the communist side, the Bolshevik maybe. And there was one of the princes. Well, they were captured maybe in 1917, but they were held captive for a year or so, and then they were executed. And rumor had that one young princess was not killed during that massacre. And there is at least one person in America who came from another country with an accent, who claims to be that surviving princess. And Ingrid Bergman won an Oscar for this movie called Anastasia. That's the name of that princess. It turns out it's a fake person trying to impersonate the princess. Actually, in the movie, I don't know if I've seen it or not. In the movie, Yul Brynner was playing a man who is manipulating this girl to make her doing things or behaving a certain way in order to impersonate this princess. So the movie didn't say she was a real princess. It says she was not. Okay. This is the age issue I talked about, because she was actually quite old, even older when she was 39, when she made another Joan of Arc movie. But at that time, people did not think she was too old for that role. And here is a Academy Award nomination and wins for this movie. It was nominated for many categories and won 3 of them, but not for the director, not for the main leading roles. And so it was some other secondary awards, such as cinematography. I wouldn't say it's secondary, but it's not the big flashy ones. Okay, costume cinematography, which means photography, and an honorary award. So it's not the big star awards, but we have a best supporting actor, Jose Farrell. He won, and it's the first time he was in the movie. He won that, but he was not a young man because he was on stage for quite a few years and became very famous as a stage actor. And for Ingrid Bergman, she was nominated 7 times. For Whom the Bell Tolls is called the 战地钟声, with the Ernest Hemingway story novel. With she was opposite Gary Cooper. And there's Gaslight. And Gaslight became a very fashionable word recently since Donald Trump became president, because in the movie Gaslight, Ingrid Bergman plays a bride. She just got married to this man, and this man is an evil man who wants to kill these and that and people. And when she became suspicious, the husband tried to make her appear mentally unstable. So the husband would sneak into the attic and adjust the gas light. At that time, people have gas light to light your house. And she would adjust the light so that the wife would often say, "Oh, how come the light is dimmed?" and so on, so that people would not believe her because they think she was having a moment. She was not quite reliable. So when Donald Trump became a president, people are trying to, they're creating fake news and telling lies and here and there, and they would make something fake to lead you astray, so you don't know whether it's true or not. So gaslight became a verb in the past few years. The exact meaning, it's very hard to grasp, okay? But I have seen that movie. And so she was nominated and received the award for Gaslight, and not for The Bells of St. Mary, which has Bing Crosby, and not for Joan of Arc, which is the movie we are talking about. But then she won another one, a second one for Anastasia, 真假公主. Then she won another one as a supporting actress. This is a sterling ensemble of big actors in this movie called Murder on the Orient Express, which is an Agatha Christie movie. And Agatha Christie always writes stories, murders, mystery stories with lots of suspects. She would usually have about 10 people who all have different motives to be wanting to kill this person who was murdered eventually. So when you have a movie like that, you have an opportunity to hire many famous actors to be part of the movie. So always an Agatha Christie movie would have a dozen of big stars, and Ingrid Bergman was in this movie playing a role, and she won an Oscar as the best supporting actress. And her very last movie was Autumn Sonata with Liv Ullmann, who played her daughter. And she was playing a famous concert pianist, and she was out giving concert everywhere. So her relationship with her daughter was very strained. And this resonated with her real life story, because she was always out there making movies elsewhere, especially during the years she married the second husband, while the first husband would not let her see the daughter. So she had a very strained relationship with especially that daughter. So this movie really made her feel, we say 共鸣, huh? She identified with the feeling of this person. And that is her very last movie, I think. Then she died of cancer. She and Jose Farah were nominated in this movie, and Jose Farah played the Dauphin in this movie. And Jose Farah won the supporting actor award. And the director is Victor Fleming, and he was a very, very big shot. And he died a few months after this movie was out. And let's talk about him for a while. Here I used a slide I kept from last time. It's Dauphin of France. We'll pronounce it as Dauphin. A Dauphin of France is like the crown prince or the heir apparent, or like Prince of Wales in England, because it is a title for the person who is to be the king. So it's called the heir apparent, meaning the person is apparently going to be the heir. H-E-I-R is the person who will inherit the throne. Okay, so he was the Dauphin. I'm sorry. Oh, okay. The position, the title of the Dauphin was used in France from, drink some water, from 1350 to 1791. And again, another short period. So this is not too important for us. This is Victor Fleming, who is the director of this big movie. It's quite a big project, and he is used to that. His two most famous movies are Gone with the Wind and The Wizard of Oz. And he won an Oscar for Gone with the Wind as the director. So you must agree that he is a big shot. So he's an American film director, cinematographer. So he was a 摄影师 as well. Some of the directors were originally a cinematographer, or they were an editor of movies, and they learned the trade in certain ways, and that made it easier for them to pick up the job to be a director. And he was a producer as well. And Gone with the Wind, we don't have to talk anything. Everybody know about this movie. It's a good movie and a very, very successful. And The Wizard of Oz is also a very good movie and very successful. And they were made in the same year. So that Victor Fleming must be very, very busy that year. And this is a picture of Jose Farah when he was younger. And of course, he died now. So the outstanding thing about him is he's a Puerto Rican. And before him, there was no Puerto Rican actor that people know. Maybe there were a few here and there. But he was the first big shot Puerto Rican actor because he won a Tony for Cyrano de Bergerac, and later he won an Oscar for the same role, Cyrano de Bergerac. And we talked about that movie quite a lot. And you can see that he was not the handsome type. So he is we call 演技派, huh? He is a really good, solid actor, very talented in the trade. And so he played the same role, Cyrano de Bergerac, on stage and in the movies, and won an award, and it made him famous for being the first Puerto Rican-born actor and the first Hispanic actor to win an Oscar. Even Hispanic, no Spanish actors ever won. Not only Puerto Rican or Mexican or wherever in America. No Spanish actor won before him. I don't know if that Spanish actor later did. What was his name? He married Melanie Griffith. He was in Zorro, and he was in a lot of good movies recently. Pride and Glory. Anyway, a Spanish actor. I think his last name has 3 syllables. Well, somebody can come up with that name. Okay, let's forget about that. I will tell you next time. So Jose Ferral, he was, of course, very famous for being the leading actor in this movie Cyrano de Bergerac on stage and there. But he was also, a few years later, he was nominated again, but did not win for playing this French painter in Moulin Rouge. Moulin Rouge is a Hong Morfa. Rouge is a Hong. Moulin is a mill. And the very well-known modern painter is called Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec. He is lame. I would say he's lame. He could not walk straight. That's what I mean by he was lame. And because of that, this person had lots of 心结, couldn't be calm and pleasant with other people. So he has a mentally something that he felt sorry about. So this is during the time of French like Impressionism. He could be considered part of the Impressionism, one of the Impressionist painters. So it's the late 19th century. Yeah, okay. And he was a defense attorney in the Caine Mutiny, which is a World War II Navy movie, because there was a supply ship that on which a mutiny happened. And like the other famous mutiny movie, which is called the Mutiny on Bounty, okay? Mutiny on Bounty is more famous than the Caine Mutiny. It's more illustrious with an exotic location, which is at Tahiti, and a British naval ship, the Bounty, okay? I've seen the ship, the Bounty, docked at Greenwich Village. I don't know if it's still there, but it was not the original one, but it's a remake of the movie, okay? She was in the Ship of Fools, which has a lot of people in it, with Vivian Lee, Oscar Werner, lots of people in that, okay? It's about a ship of Jewish refugees, and they could not, people on the American continent would not let them dock. They escaped from Germany, but they could not dock in any port. And the last one is more recent, in 1984, and it's called The Doom. It's a very popular novel adapted into a movie, and this was the first adaptation, and there is a recent one maybe a year ago. The Doom 就是也不是沙洲，就是在沙漠里面有一个一个的山哈，这个叫做 sand dune. If you go to Death Valley, you could see that. or if you can go to the Oregon coast, southern Oregon coast, all the way into California, on the beach, there are a lot of sand dunes. But that story is kind of a science fiction. So he also was on stage even after he became a movie actor, and he was also a director and producers and things like that. Yeah, he was the uncle of George Clooney, which is something new because he married Rosemary Clooney, so he's uncle of George Clooney by marriage, and he married twice to Rosemary Clooney. 1953 to 1961, and later they got married again, but then still got a divorce. Now let's talk about the second Joan of Arc movie, 1999, and the important thing is the actress is Lily Sobieski, who got famous. She started to be in movies at an even younger age. She became quite famous at age 15 for being in the sequel of Blue Lagoon. The Blue Lagoon was an exotic romantic movie with the Brooke Shield in it. But then it sold so well that they made a sequel, and the Lily Sobieski was in this movie. So she has a kind of strange name. It was not her original name, I think. It's just for people to be able to pronounce her name quickly and feeling a little different because no other people have this kind of name. So they have a big cast. All these people are really, really famous people. Yeah, Jacqueline Bisset, Powers Booth, and Neil Patrick Harris, who was in the TV sitcom. Do you call that a sitcom? It's Doogie Howser, MD. He was a teenager, like 13 years old, playing a doctor because he was so smart and graduated from medical school. So he's a person who looked very smart. However, later on, he came out as being gay, so his roles are being limited by that aspect. But he's still very active acting, but not always the leading romantic role because of his being gay. And Olympia Dukakis played the mother of Lily Sobieski. She is always a supporting actress, but she did win an Oscar for being the mother of Nicolas Cage in the movie Moonstruck with Cher. Cher won an Oscar for that. That was an amazing thing because she was a singer. But she decided that she wants to win an Oscar for acting, so she really worked hard to achieve that. And Shirley MacLaine was quite famous during our time. We've seen numerous movies, but she had a minor role in this movie. And Peter O'Toole, of course, is very famous and played big roles, but he played this Bishop Cochon in this movie, and he won I don't think it's an Oscar, probably an Emmy for it, yeah. Maximilian Schell is also a very famous actor in our time because he won an Oscar as a leading actor in the famous movie Judgment at Nuremberg, 纽伦堡大审. At that time, nobody in this country has heard about him. In fact, they did not ask him to be an actor in this movie, and they wrote to his sister, Maria Schell, and by accident he showed up, or whatever. It's some kind of mix-up. So he was hired to play this role, and he became world famous after that. And this Peter Strauss is not so famous, but I liked him very much. He, in the beginning, he was in TV movies a lot. The first one was called The Richmond Poor Man, and there were sequels. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I like him a lot, but not too many people know. Apparently, Uchi is, again, my buddy.
I'm a fan.
So this is being a TV series, it cannot compete in Oscar. So it was nominated for 13 Emmys and and also got 4 nominations for Golden Globe. These two would consider awards for TVs and other realm of entertainment, but Academy Award or Oscar is for movies only. So these TV movies, they don't count. Okay. So they were nominated for 13, which is amazing. And some of them won, but Lily Sobieski was nominated for Best Actress for Emmy and the Golden Globe and the Satellite Award, but she did not win, but she really received a rave review and became quite famous later. The actor who actually won was Peter O'Toole with a Golden Globe Award. So this is a picture of Lily Sobieski, apparently when she was a little older. Of course, she is alive. She is much younger than we are, so she has a lot of life left. However, she quit. She retired from being an actress, and she went into art like painting and things like that. But she received a very good review for this movie. And Peter O'Toole, I am sure everybody knows him, and know why he's in this garb, costume, because he was Lawrence of Arabia. And that was probably, the first movie he was ever in. And David Lean, the director, chose to cast him. And he was not very young, like 29, still young, but he was on stage playing Shakespearean plays a lot before this, and maybe had made a name for himself, but not outside his country. And after Lawrence of Arabia, of course, he became very, very famous. And there's something very interesting about his award-winning history, because he never won an Oscar. He was nominated 8 times, starting with the first one, Lawrence of Arabia, and the second one, Beckett. And then he played the same role as he played in Beckett, but much older. Beckett is about the story between a king, Henry II, and his bishop, Thomas Becket, how they were buddies and then they became estranged and enemies. And this same King Henry II grew old to have wife and kids and so on. And his kids, many of them played by major stars who became famous later, like Anthony Hopkins. Who's that? I cannot come up with that name, who became the boyfriend of Vanessa Redgrave and who played the 007 for 2 movies. But then he quit. Anybody know his name? And I think there's another son, I forgot who played that. Anyway, Peter O'Toole played the old King Henry II, who had 3 sons. Each one wanted to be the next king. And the wife played by Katharine Hepburn, who is very much the boss in the house, who's the queen, of course. And then there's a Goodbye, Mr. Chips, which is a very famous old movie, but this is a remake and it's a musical. So Peter O'Toole would sing in this movie. And then he was nominated many times later for The Ruling Class, The Stuntman, My Favorite Year, and Venus. These are not as famous as the 4 earlier movies he was in, but he didn't win for any of those roles. So he was given an honorary award in the year 2002. So he keeps a record for being the most Oscar nominated and never won actor. And he tied that record with Glenn Close, who is also a very great actor, or you can say actress. He was good in many roles, but she was nominated also 8 times and never won. So before she was about to die, maybe they are going to give her an honorary award. Sometimes they really wanted to give some person an award, for example, Gregory Peck or Paul Newman or famous people like that. But they managed to squeeze, at the end of their career, they squeeze in an older role and win the Oscar, like Gregory Peck playing Atticus in how do you say that? To Kill the Mockingbird, yeah. 我们中文叫做梅冈城故事。
梅冈城。
Yeah. And Paul Newman, yes, they also managed to give him an award very late in his career. He was not given an award for movies like HUD or the one with Butch Cassidy, or many of his younger roles. He could have won, but he didn't. But I think he won it for The Verdict, which is a trial movie. And it's not so popular, but they really want to give one to him, so he won one. That's how things work. Sometimes it's political. And this is Maximilian Schell. And he died, yeah. And he's a very accomplished pianist and a conductor. Being by conductor, we mean a symphony conductor. He's very, very good with the classical music. So he appeared in concert with Leonard Bernstein, and he appeared with Berlin Orchestra in Berlin and Vienna. So he's really a respected musician, high-class musician, but he's also very good actor on stage as well as in movies, in German language as well in English language. He speaks English so fluently that he was the most popular German-speaking actor in English movies. And his sister, older sister, Maria, was known in this country earlier than he was. I remember how when I was maybe 6 or 7, I read the newspaper, 吊人树, the hanging tree, with Maria Schell and probably Gary Cooper in that movie. That was slightly before our time, but if you're older than I am for 10 years, you probably would be able to catch some of her movies. But he became so famous instantly after Judgment of Nuremberg.
So he was German.
Yeah, he is German, and he played a German lawyer in that, opposite Spencer Tracy. They were 2 trial lawyers opposite each other in the trial in Nuremberg, and they were both nominated for leading actor. But Spencer Tracy did not win, and he won. As far as foreign actors are concerned, he is famous only after Maurice Chevalier and Marcello Mastroianni. Marcello is Italian. He was in movies like 8½, a Fellini movie, and lots of other movies. I've seen so many of his movies. But Maurice Chevalier is even more famous, if I can say so, but he's older than we are. So we don't know much about him because of our age. But he was famous. For example, he was in the movie with the girl who played in another movie opposite Clark Gable about San Francisco earthquake. Yeah, something McDonald. That was her last name. That McDonald American lady, she was in a lot of movies with Maurice Chevalier, but we only came to know Maurice Chevalier because he was the grandfather in Gigi. Gigi is translated as 金粉世界 with Louis Jourdan and the girl, how do you call that girl? She was in American in Paris.
Leslie
Caron, yes, Leslie Caron, yes. Yeah, of course, we went to see Gigi. We like to see the young man and the young girl. But Maurice Chevalier, he stole the show for being the very happy side witness of the story. He was there in the tower, Eiffel Tower, the square of Eiffel Tower, which is called the Mars. How do you say square in French? He was there all the time, seeing this girl and the boy together from when they were small. So he was a nobody in the story, but he sang a few songs and was very witty and amusing. I like him a lot, yes. So this is about Maximilian Schell. And Maximilian is a common name in Germany, had a lot of kings called Maximilian, Maximilian first or second or third, and so on. So that's a famous name. And they say this means max in a million. If there are a million people, there's only one Max. Okay, that's what the name means. I don't know. So he was nominated again twice, but did not win. One is for supporting. Julia is a movie made by Jane Fonda. Yeah, Jane Fonda made the movie because she is kind of a communist advocate, and Julia is sort of a communist story. And she had Vanessa Redgrave in that movie, who won an Oscar for it. He also played a personality. He is a very versatile actor. He played different roles magnificently, who are so different from each other. He played Simon Bolivar, who was a hero in the independence of South American countries. He became president of 5 countries at the same time. So it's Simon Bolivar. And he played Peter the Great in the Russian, who's the Russian emperor. And he played Albert Einstein, who's a great scientist. And he also played Vladimir Lenin, who is the Lenin of the Russian Revolution. And he also played Stalin. So he really played all these great people all over the world. Being a German person, he's playing all these non-German roles. And he won lots of awards for these things. And her sister is Maria, and he once made a movie in the year 2002 called My Sister Maria. Of course, it's not a feature movie, it's a documentary. And he also made a documentary about Marlene Dietrich, who is a very famous German actress. Marlene Dietrich, at the beginning of the Second World, he left the country as a traitor of the country, so the country would not talk to her at all. They thought she was gone because she went to America and naturalized as American citizen and made lots of different movies. And most German people hated her for a while, at least. And this guy, Maximilian Schell, he is a fan of Marlene Dietrich. And nowadays, of course, they don't hate her anymore. And if you go to, for example, Berlin, I stayed at a hotel, the cross street was called the Marlene Dietrich Strasse. This is a third Saint Joan, which means Joan of Arc. First, I thought Joan of Arc means she has an arc or something, maybe means she was saintly, but it's not. It's her parents' last name is Dark, D apostrophe ARC. That's her last name. So when you say Joan of Arc, you don't really mean Saint Joan. You only mean this girl whose name is Joan d'Arc. Okay. And this movie is based on the English side story, Bernard Shaw's Saint Joan. So he called her Saint Joan, which is very respectable. And it was a play, of course, being written by Bernard Shaw, but later it was adapted into a movie. And the screenplay is restructured. It was a play. Usually people just change their play a little bit to add some outdoor scenes so that people, the audience would not feel too closed in. But this movie, they asked Graham Greene to do the screenplay. And Graham Greene was a really, really big shot. So it's famous for having this Graham Greene to change this play into a movie script. Okay. And we'll talk about Graham Greene a little later, and then we'll talk about Otto Preminger, who is originally an Austrian. I mean, he was born under Austrian-Hungarian Empire, but you can say he was German. German annexed Austria in the year 1939. Anyway, I was saying that he was a foreigner speaking with a very thick German accent. I've seen a biography of Dorothy Dandridge, played by, what's that girl? The Black woman who won an Oscar for some with the, oh boy, this name came so hard for me now.
Is it Tyson? No.
A very short name. Maybe I should keep on using my phone. I could rap her name right out of the internet quickly. Anyway, Otto Preminger was played by, I don't know by whom, because he had an affair with that Black actress called Dorothy Dandridge. And that girl, the actress who played her, was lovely. I like her very much. And I just mentioned she won an Oscar in a movie with Billy Bob Thornton called something. Anyway. Anyway, there are too many names. Okay. So this movie we're talking about, this Joan of Arc movie, was a film debut of actress Jean, this girl. Okay, I always called her Jean Seberg. and we translated her name as Zhen Sibao.
Mm.
And today I checked her name, and there are many different versions telling you how to pronounce her last name. One says Subu. I don't know where that came from. One says Sabor. I don't know what that comes from. So I cannot pronounce it. I will just keep calling her Jane Seaborg, Seaberg, or whatever. She appeared in movies for the first time when Otto Preminger auditioned 18,000 young women and selected her from nowhere. So she was never in the movie, and she did a very good job in a very serious movie, because it came from Bernard Shaw and came from Otto Preminger, and it came from Graham Greene, and it has a lot of other people in the same movie too. So it was her privilege to be able to show up in this movie as a leading actress at a very young age. However, she had a miserable life, haunted by FBI. This is the story I hope to be able to tell a little later today. Okay. This is to tell you the story about it, okay? And this is a slide about Graham Greene. I said he was a big shot. He was nominated for Nobel Prize twice in a row, but he did not win. So he was a very respected novelist. However, he was famous in two ways. One is to be able to write excellent literary works with complicated stories and complicated characters and so on and so forth. Very, very serious. And to discuss about his Catholic faith. On the other hand, he writes the same stories. They are very extremely entertaining, popular, and loved by many, not necessarily sophisticated people. So he is a good writer who straddles on two worlds: the famous sophisticated world and the cheap popular world. Okay, so he writes stories that people love to read about, but they don't care how much valuable it was. So he's a good person. Okay, and he agreed to adopt George Bernard Shaw's story, its play, into a movie. So it's a privilege for the movie to have his participation. Okay, that's because Otto Preminger is a very picky person. He wants to. Did I do this? Okay. So these are Graham Greene's works. He wrote tons of novels and short stories and nonfiction and so on. But this is only a very short list of his works. And because his stories are so entertaining, about half of them were made into movies. That The Power and Glory, The Third Man was a very early one with Joseph Cotton and Orson Welles. And Of Affair was made into a movie very recently, probably in the 90s, with Julianne Moore, and maybe even in this century, and Refine. Yeah. The Quiet American was an early movie with John Wayne and Maureen O'Hara. And there's Our Man in Havana is a spy movie. So it's all the rage during the 60s and 70s when there were a lot of spy movies. I didn't see The Comedian, but it was a movie. I think it was Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton, but it was a bomb. That means it was not a popular movie. Anyway, so he was a very, very famous writer and very popular to regular people, and lots of movies came out of him. Oh, this is what I already talked about. And this is you can see he's a kind of a German look. Otto Preminger, he was born into the Austro-Hungarian, 就是奥匈帝国的时代。那时候，Germany became a country in 1972. I mean 1872. So there was Germany, but he was not born a German person. He was in Austria. And he came to America. He directed lots of movies and are quite famous. For example, there was a John Wayne and Kirk Douglas Navy movie in World War II called In Harm's Way that also has Patricia, what's that? A very short last name, Patricia Neal, yeah, Neal. That was directed by Otto Preminger. So he has a very large range of expertise. He could make war movies and he could make other things. And these are some of the movies he made that became very famous. Here we highlight the line that says he made movies that push the boundary of censorship. In the past, there was a lot of censorship. You cannot have naked body or dirty words or whatever. And there are lots of social taboo you should not mention. And he was one of the very earlier directors who wanted to push boundaries. For example, there are 3 smaller bullets. He made a movie with Frank Sinatra called The Man with the Golden Arm. Called that 金币人. I haven't seen it because I was too little, but I've seen the ad in the newspaper. And it's about a heroin addict or something. At that time, nobody talked about addicts. And this second one, I have seen this movie, Anatomy of a Murder. It's a court trial. A husband was accused of murdering a man that his wife was having an affair with. So this is, you can say having an affair, but I believe she claimed to be raped. So this is talking about rape. And at that time, nobody talked about rape. And I saw this movie much later. It was an earlier movie with Jimmy Stewart and Lee Remick. I think it was Lee Remick. Yeah. And it has the person who played the husband is, I cannot come up with the name. He married Lauren Bacall, whose first husband was Humphrey Bogart, but I cannot come up with his name. I've seen many of his movies. Okay, I'm not gonna try, but I do know the name. And then there's homosexuality. That's also an area. You look at the date of this movie, it was mostly before my time, before my college time. So these movies were early. He was of an earlier time. He was twice nominated, but did not win. In this movie, there were a few famous people, and I'm not going to talk about all of them, but I briefly talk about Richard Widmark, who is usually playing a supporting role in war movies or Western movies, mostly Western movies, but also film noir, like detective movies. In this movie, if you want to see any movie that's not free, you can certainly find these movies by paying some money to see it streaming. It's certainly not in any movie theater, but you can get it from the library, or you can stream it from like Hulu or Netflix or Amazon or whatever. Richard Widmark, you saw him everywhere when you were young, in many movies. If I show you a picture, you will know. Okay, so the leading role is actually Gene Seberg, and there's Richard Todd and Anton Walbrook. They were both English actors, and of course, John Gielgud is definitely an English actor, and he is more famous than anyone else. And I'm going to talk a little about John Gielgud. This is Jean Seberg or Seberg or Suburg or whatever. Okay. So she died very young. She was 40 and she killed herself. She became famous, world famous, playing this role in this movie. However, she became even more famous a few years later because she was, is it later? Or, let me see, let's check. We have this movie, which is 57. Okay, so this is of course the first movie for her, but she appeared in a French movie, not an American movie. I believe she speaks French fluently. She appeared in the French movie and became world famous for her role in that movie. And that movie is called Breathless, or you can call it À bout de souffle. Okay, you know, souffle is air, breathe, So you bake a souffle, it's got a lot of air in it. Okay, À bout de souffle is translated into Chinese as 断了气. It's some fugitive of law. They were on the run, always breathlessly. So in English, it's called breathless, and in French, it's called the 断了气. Okay, so she became very famous 3 years later for appearing in this movie in the leading role, and became an icon of French New Wave. Okay. 我们说法国的新潮派电影，it's called French New Wave, and she was in the second French New Wave movie, and there are 3 famous French directors who started this one after another, and this movie is about a fugitive. He probably killed somebody. He was played by Jean-Paul Belmondo. 我们叫做杨波贝蒙，或者说尚博贝蒙。And they both became very famous because of this movie. This young man and the young woman were running away from law because he committed some kind of crime. And the famous thing about the movie is this director whose name is Jean-Luc Godard. Jean-Luc, Luc 那个 U 是要 U 的声音 Jean-Luc， 所以翻译成上卢或者是约翰 Luc. Anyway, that's his name, Godard. And he I was so excited about it because he just died last week. Okay, he is a very famous person in the movie industry because he was one of the 3 founders or leaders in the French New Wave. Okay, let me see. I have this. Okay, so this is called the French New Wave, and there are 3 famous French. They're all French, French directors. One is François Truffaut. François Truffaut is even more famous because his movies are more popular, and the Godard's movies they are less popular. But this 400 Blow was one of Truffaut's very first movies, and he went on to make many movies, some of them very popular and some of them made in English. So he became a big director, more than anyone else in this 3 people. And the next one, this actually, I'm going back to the talk about 400 Blows. It's about a child. It's like a 7 to 9 years old child as a leading role. He ran away from home and doing all these things. But this by itself is not a popular movie, but he went on and made many, many other movies that are very popular. I ran out of time today, but the other person is Alain René, whose famous first movie was Hiroshima Mon Amour, 就是广岛再见 or 我爱. Anyway, you can translate into several different things. And this movie is famous of its stream of consciousness. 就是像, for example, Virginia Woolf, this kind of novelist, they write stories that do not go straight line from the beginning to the end. They're jumping around. So that's how they make the movies or write the novels. So these are the famous three people. And this is Jean-Luc Godard, and he died last week, September 13th. And he was the most famous French New Wave person. He made the movies very, very creatively. I cannot explain to you. It's almost like Orson Welles in America. Every shot, every angle, everything is different. Every storytelling, it's just a very, very new wave. Okay, so that's a person I want to tell you. And he made many movies more than this. And since this is copied from Wikipedia, anything that's underlined in blue means there is another page in Wikipedia that tells you about this. So all his movies have a link where you can read about that movie in particular. And this, I want to tell you about the story of her before I talk a little bit about John Gielgud. She, of course, got famous very quickly with those two movies, and she appeared in 34 movies, but half of them she made in Europe. And the reason that she was in Europe, not only because she could speak French very well, but because the FBI was after her all the time. When she was a young girl, like Jane Fonda, she got acquainted with people in the Black Panther group. Black Panther is an American civil rights group because they have Black people. They became notorious because of FBI chase after them and trying to arrest them and claiming that they were communists. And Jean Sieber was befriending a Black Panther member, and she donated some dollars, not a big amount, like $10,000 or whatever, to that cause, which is the group Black Panther Party. And because of that, the FBI hated him, especially J. Edgar Hoover. He particularly ordered FBI to make trouble for her. They were recording her, they were following her, simply because she was a friend of a Black Panther member. And they made rumors which were not true about her. They say that when she was pregnant, she was having a Black child from that Black Panther member. As a result, when she had not abortion, how do you say, miscarriage, because she was so stressed out that she had a miscarriage. That baby was not born alive. And her husband had held a press conference showing the genetic DNA result of that baby fetus to show that that baby did not have a Black father. So every day of her life, she was chased after FBI. Her phones were targeted, tapped or whatever. So in the end, she committed suicide because she couldn't stand it anymore. But she was in more movies after that. For example, Bonjour Tristesse, that was a Sargon. There was a teenage novelist, Sha Gang. She, at age 17, she wrote this novel, and this actress played her in that. 我们叫做日安忧郁哈 ，tristesse means sorrow 哈。Bonjour Tristesse, and she was also in, of course, Breathless and Moment to Moment. These are, I've seen all of them, and Paint Your Wagon and Airport. Paint Your Wagon is a mainstream musical with the music, the song and the lyrics by Alan J. Lerner and Frederick Lowe, who also brought to you My Fair Lady, Camelot, On the Clear Day You Could See Forever, many very popular musicals. And this one called The Paint Your Wagon is less notable because it's about a woman in the wagon band, whatever. When people went to the West from the East, they each have a wagon and they line into a band. And this is about one of the wagon with a girl who owns this wagon, but she has two husbands. And the two husbands were played by Lee Marvin and Clint Eastwood. So it's got a solid cast, but this movie was not a very big hit. So this girl was in several very respectable movies, but half of her movies were made in Europe, and she spoke, for example, French in those movies. So she was a good actress, but because of her young fleeing association with some girlfriend that the FBI did not like. In fact, nowadays we think Black Panther was hounded by FBI, and when we grew up during that time, we thought Black Panther was a very violent terrorist group, but it also the image was created by FBI itself. And nowadays they are getting some kind of recognition that they were really just a civil rights group, but being a Black people party, they suffered a lot of pains. And some of the recent movies you see have Black Panther story, or either the entire story. I think the one called the Judah and the Black Messiah was a recent movie. I think it was 1 year or 2 years ago that was considered for Oscar. Actually, I think one of them, I cannot come up with the name. Have you seen that Black movie called Get Out? Yeah, Get Out. It was an excellent movie about Black people nowadays. It's quite scary. Yeah, that's a good movie with Kaluuya. I couldn't remember his first name, but he's Kaluuya, a wonderful Black actor. And I think he probably won an Oscar for that Black Panther movie called Judah and the Black Messiah. Yeah, that was in last year's Oscar competition. And another movie called the Chicago 7, also last year, I think. Chicago 7 was directed by Aaron Sorkin. Okay, I think it's Aaron Sorkin. Anyway, he is usually he's a TV director, but I don't know if he won an Oscar, but he certainly was nominated for an Oscar for being the director of Chicago 7. That was about, among other people, Black Panther was part of it, but mainly it's got 7 people who were against the war. They went with a lot of people to Chicago to protest against the war at the Democratic Convention for presidential nomination. Yeah. That was a great movie too. Yeah, but one of the 7 was the Black Panther Party leader, and you have. Let's not talk about it. It's too late already. Okay, that's a wonderful current movie. Yeah, only 2 years old. Okay, so she committed suicide when she was 40 years old because she really could not take it anymore. And this is a picture of Richard Widmark. He was in tons of Western movies. I'm sure you have seen him before. And just want to talk a little bit about John Gielgud to finish today's story. And he was a stage actor doing Shakespearean plays for a long time. However, he did cross over into making movies a little later in his life. And there are 3 Shakespearean actors, English ones, Ralph Richardson, Laurence Olivier, and John Gielgud. They're called the Holy Trinity of actors who dominated the British stage. And because he was of an earlier time, we did not see him a lot playing young people, but a lot of movies had him in them when he was older. So he's always playing as his supporting role, not very important, but he was considered the best Hamlet ever in his time. Okay, that's all I want to say. Okay, but I do want to say something about it that is okay, this is a quick one about Shakespearean plays on 100-Year War. So Shakespeare wrote 8 plays about the kings during that 100-Year War, which is about 100 years before Shakespeare's time. So in the late 16th century, Shakespeare wrote all these plays. And he wrote the Henry VI first, but 4 and the 5th he wrote much later. So it's not chronologically he was writing these plays. But all these 5 big shots, big kings in this war were written about by Shakespeare, including a fictitious person who is Falstaff in this Merry Wives of Windsor. This is a clownish person in fiction. This was also made into a lot of operas. Okay, but the last thing I want to tell you is about next movie. I want you to prepare to watch 1 or 2 or more of the movie called The Cinderella. And there are 2 here. Actually, there are 3 links here that was let me go back to this. So we have the Cinderella movie in the year 1965 with Leslie Ann Warren playing Cinderella. And there are 2 links in YouTube. You can find the same movie, same length on YouTube. And you can also watch the other one, which is the same musical, but it has Julie Andrews, which is a TV special much earlier in 1957. So it's a much smaller production with simple cast and scenes, the plot. Well, everything is simpler with Julie Andrews, but you probably know Julie Andrews, so that may give you a lot of fun. But it's the same musical written by Rodgers and Hammerstein, I believe. Yeah, Rodgers and Hammerstein, who brought you The Sound of Music and many others like The King and I and Carousel and so on. So this is a musical. It's very short, only an hour and 18 minutes, but it was made into a TV movie by Julie Andrews in 1957, and with Leslie Ann Warren playing the same girl in 1965, which is colored. So in color, okay. The TV one was not in color, I believe. However, you can also watch, if you go to a streaming company, for not for free, you have to pay for this Cinderella 1997, but it's extremely interesting because it has an all ethnic cast. You have a black Cinderella, a black fairy godmother, but the prince was Filipino, and the king's mother was Whoopi Goldberg. So it's all over the place. So it's I believe it's a lot of fun to watch if you want to pay a little money to watch that. But there are, all these movies called Cinderella. So if you want really to find movies to watch about Cinderella, you have a lot to choose from, but they're not on YouTube. Not all on YouTube. And there's TV and the ballet and the opera and the musical and so on. So this Cinderella is really a popular movie. In case you don't know yet, it is, we call it 灰姑娘. It is a poor girl was able to go to the king's, the prince's ball, in which she was, the prince fell in love with her, but she had to come back because the carriage was made of pumpkin. Okay. Anyone want to say anything?
I just want to say that remember the name, that Fox's first name is Michael J.
Fox. Okay.
Yeah. And
Halle Berry is the girl, the black girl who played Dorothy Dandridge in the story about Otto Preminger. That was Halle Berry. Yeah. And what else?
Halle Berry.
Yeah. I just know her name was short.
And also the other one, the 3-syllable names, I think is Banderas.
Bandero, yes, Bandero, yeah. Banderas and Banderas.
Banderas.
Yeah.
Antonio,
okay, yeah. He came from
remember.
Spain, and he was in a lot of Spanish movies.
Zorro.
Zorro is an American movie, but he was in a lot of Spanish-speaking Spanish movies. He's cooperating with one of the big Spanish director all the time. Actually, most of the time he was playing that director's stories. There are several very famous Spanish directors, but I couldn't figure out who is who. There's Benicio del Toro, and there's, I don't know, there are quite a few of them, so I can figure them out. They were all very famous, and they're really making good movies. If you would branch out to watch some other movies in other languages, they are really, really good.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's Antonio Bandera. Yeah, he came from Spain, and then he was in a movie with Melanie Griffith, and they fell in love. So Melanie Griffith divorced her husband, who was not Ben Johnson, something Johnson.
Don Johnson.
Don Johnson. Okay, Don Johnson. Yeah, they all have a list of spouses.
Yeah. Right.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Very interesting.
Okay, bye.
Bye. See you next time.
Uh-huh.
Bye-bye.